Wungarari Majinu, Paula Kruger, ABC Radio, Canberra Warraji.
You may not think much about the local production industry, but you probably think about your favourite TV shows quite a bit. What is your favourite Australian TV show or Australian movie? Content made here in Australia? If you've got young kids, it's probably Bluey. Or were you a Home and Away fan? Neighbours? What about movies? You're thinking Crocodile Dundee, Muriel's Wedding, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. For me, I think Strictly Ballroom is still one of my all-time favourite Australian films. Well, here in Australia, TV broadcasters are usually under obligation to air a set amount of local Australian content. But those quotas, they were recently suspended, and that was in response to the COVID-19 crisis. And it could have a real impact on the screen production industry. So 86% of the industry are actually small businesses. With you right now is Michael Tier. He is the CEO of one of those small businesses, Wildbear Entertainment, and he's also the president of the SPA, which is Screen Producers Australia. It's the governing council for the industry. Welcome to Afternoons on ABC Radio Canberra, Michael. Can you tell me, how did these quotas become established in the first place?
Hi, Paula. Well, the original intent behind the quotas was in response to a crisis, really, in that many of the free-to-air networks in Australia had almost no Australian content. And there was a recognition that there needed to be some mechanism to sort of force those networks to commission Australian content. And part of the challenge being an Australian producer is that you speak English, or we speak English, and there's a wealth of great content, a lot of it coming from the US and UK. So if you're running a business of a broadcaster, then it's often cheaper to buy in content that's already been paid for in its home market. So there was a shortfall, and back in the day, the Australian government initiated a system of content quotas, and the free-to-air networks have access to spectrum, and they're businesses that not everyone gets granted a license. So as part of that quid pro quo, there was an obligation to make Australian content.
Why, in your view, were these quotas important?
Well, effectively, they underpin the basis of the production industry in Australia. A lot of our content we do sell overseas, but one of the key when you're putting together what's known as a finance plan, the budget for a show, a lot of the time the first piece of the financing puzzle comes from Australia, and a lot of the time some of the decisions around what sort of content to commission come from the obligations that the broadcasters have, and this is specifically towards what we call at-risk genres, which are drama, documentary, and kids. They're the genres which are harder to finance and have a particular local voice, and although they're popular overseas, it's really important that the domestic market's buoyant and the buyers are in the market, and we can convince overseas investors that we've got a strong domestic base for the show, and that gives them confidence to commission or add money to the budget to fully fund the project.
And so who had to abide by the quotas in the industry here in Australia?
It was the free-to-air networks.
Right.
And for many years they've had a content obligation. This is primarily 9, 7 and 10. Foxtel have an obligation as well to spend a certain amount of their budget on drama. It's clear that there has been a major structural reform of the industry, and that now we have many platforms from which Australian audiences can get their content, including Netflix and Disney Plus and Apple and so on. So, as well as the content quota suspension that's on the free-to-airs at the moment, then there is also a major review which has been initiated at the government, just looking at where those content obligations should fall and who should have an obligation to produce a domestic content, given those structural changes in that, the internet and streaming services were not conceived when the original quotas were developed, and there's been some changes, and that those quotas need to be updated to reflect the reality of the viewing habits of audiences and also the sort of structural and economics of the industry as well.
You're on Afternoons on ABC Radio Canberra, and you're hearing from Michael Tier. He is the CEO of Wildbear Entertainment, which is a Canberra-based production company, and he is also president of Screen Producers Australia. Michael Tier, what reasoning were you given for the suspension of local content quotas?
Well, our understanding is that the government proposed this measure in response to the shutdown, the COVID shutdown, and a lot of productions were suspended, particularly in the early days of the pandemic, but the industry has responded, and there's a number of measures in place that can ensure that we can continue production, and some of those are the protocols around health and safety. And one of the other big challenges that was around getting insurance. Many of the insurers were reluctant or refused to cover productions for interruptions due to a cast member or crew member getting COVID. But there is an initiative which the government's announced, which we strongly welcome, to underpin that insurance up to the value of $50 million. So that's a great measure. But I guess what we're concerned about is on the demand side. I mean, we want our buyers, which are the networks, to be in the market commissioning content, and they're not because they don't have the obligation at the moment. And that's creating a great degree of uncertainty. I mean, the pipeline for film and television, it's a very protracted sales and development process. Scripts need to be written. There's a lot of contracting. Oftentimes there's not only domestic money but international money in the budget. So, this uncertainty where we're not sure, the quotas have been suspended for 2020 and we're still uncertain about what's going to happen in 2021. And that's notwithstanding the significant measures that the industry's taken to actually get people back into production. And the end of all of this is film and TV is a labour-intensive job. There's oftentimes hundreds of people employed on projects. So there's a great deal of hardship and uncertainty felt by the crews and cast in Australia because there's just not the certainty about getting back to work. And, of course, this is creating great concern and uncertainty not only for the businesses but also for the employees who work in the industry.
What kind of difference would reinstating that quota make to the industry right now?
Well, it would give certainty, and we'd know that the quotas give a shape to the Australian content that's going to be on air. There's a certain number of points based on the types of genres that you're producing in drama and documentary, and that will just be a significant boost. The networks will be in the business of commissioning. We know that there's got to be some structural changes, but the effect at the moment is that we haven't had the review, which is kind of to underpin the new system. We've just had the old quotas taken away, and effectively the whole industry has been deregulated within about a month's notice. And we've got this continuing uncertainty. It's not like we don't think things should change. It's just that there's nothing in place at the moment, and that's really a problem. And what we're calling on the government to do is to provide some clarity and certainty going forward. There's two big pieces of work going on: the current quotas and the new system, what that will be, and all of those are going to provide certainty and continuity for the industry. That really, we're facing a real crisis for the first time in 50 years. The underlying mechanism of the industry has been taken away.
And so, as you say, the review and the streaming companies, that obviously complicates the solutions to this. So are you saying that there needs to be an update on the quotas and we need to have this review sorted as soon as possible with recommendations? Is that what you're calling for?
That's what we're calling for. We want the interim step, if you like, of the old quotas restored. And then we want to work to the transition to the new regime, whatever that will be. There's been a review. There's been lots of submissions. We just encourage the government to sort of accelerate that process of coming out with the new model. But in the interim, we need the old quotas maintained. And if there hadn't been the COVID situation, of course, the old regime would have continued. We recognise that there was a crisis, and the health and safety of the community and the workers and everyone in the industry is taken priority. But the system it's changed. We now need to get people back to work. We've got a process for doing that. We've got protocols. We've got some insurance in place. We need now certainty on the buying side to really get back to work.
Michael Tier, you're CEO of Wildbear Entertainment, a Canberra-based production company. How have your projects been affected?
Well, we're quite fortunate in that we're documentary producers, so our primarily we are factual film and TV. We have programs on the ABC, but on Discovery and free-to-air broadcasters and National Geographic overseas and ZDF and a whole bunch of platforms, BBC and others. So we've managed to keep going with our productions. And that's another odd thing is the documentary quota has been suspended, even though a lot of the documentaries have managed to maintain their productions, because we work with much smaller crews. So we have had a hit. There's a couple of projects, two significant ones where we had some international travel, and that's no longer possible. So it has affected the business, but we are still we're still making content.
So it's those beautifully made dramas which I've been indulging in during these COVID times. It's those beautifully made Australian dramas and other TV shows that are the ones that are a big concern to you.
Yeah, that's the ones that are at the highest risk. The crews are bigger. The implementation of the COVID protocols, has. There are costs involved. There's PPE for makeup artists and so on. It's a much slower process to get the project filmed. So, but there are systems being put in place to continue those productions. But it's definitely the drama that's the one that's most at risk, and kids as well. Kids content. There's a lot of uncertainty. The networks, I think, have come out and said they're not commissioning any children's content. Currently, there still is an obligation. We recognise there is a need to look at that, but again, there's a member who was telling me recently that she had a project ready to go. It's a lot of money from international, but the domestic partner, which was a relatively small amount of the budget, pulled out.
And that was enough to end the production?
Yeah, the whole thing down. So, there's millions of dollars, export revenue, people in jobs that are lost, and, that's the reality of all this uncertainty. So, it's something that needs attention.
Well, Michael Tier, thanks for your time and your insights, and we'll keep an ear across what happens with that review. That's Michael Tier, who is the CEO of Wildbear Entertainment, a Canberra-based production company. He also has a role as president of the Screen Producers Australia, which is a governing council for the industry. You're on Afternoons on ABC Radio Canberra with Paula Kruger.